Okay. Good afternoon and welcome back. I see a number of folks who have like festive themed beverages, so you know that the holidays are coming and we're almost to a break. So this is our last meeting before Thanksgiving break. After today, we'll have the entire next week off, and then we'll be coming back on the 28th to wrap up the final 2 weeks of the term. So that's pretty exciting. We're pretty close to the finish line. I am hopefully able to unmute and have your grades visible by the end of the day today. I have a meeting scheduled for after class, which hopefully resolve the last thing I'm waiting on. I've also been I spent a lot of real estate this week trying to resolve an issue with how, if you're a comm major, you might notice that the listing for the major requirements does not actually reflect the major sheet and requirements that are listed online. So that's been a whole big issue. If you're a major, you're going to be getting an email about that later. So don't be alarmed about that, but I've been trying to resolve that. It's taken up a lot of time. So should have that ready for you by the end of the day today to help you as you're preparing and moving forward. I apologize for the delay in getting that. All right, so number of people back here today. So I wanted to do a quick recap of last class, right? So this week we are talking about the strategies and tactics that are used to constrain and ultimately hurt social change communication, right? As we've talked about from scholars and activists, it's important to know and to understand the strategies and communication used by people that might push back against your efforts. In particular, being able to devise communication and techniques that are responsive to these issues and are explicitly designed around them is some of the strategies that make for the most effective social movements and social change, right? Activists who have been along for quite a long time or who have a framework to understand how messages might be used to discredit or hurt the movement. It's not their first rodeo. They know and have developed strategies to address those issues. We talked about this in particular in regards to media framing, how an issue is discussed or talked about versus priming. What are the topics or issues that are seen as most important? We put this in the context of abortion activism in the 1990s, but also in the present. And we also talked about some of the ways in which public perception of social issues can be impacted by media and some of the ways that that's shifted through the role of online and social media. In particular, right, we looked at the idea posed here about how when the abortion activism and protests, regardless of sides, were happening in the 1990s, it was positioned by media as a civil war, where on the one end, we have the reasonable, regular people, and the other, we have these extreme activists engaged in a civil war that's posing a threat to decency. And the idea that while there were instances of violence and civil unrest that needed to be covered, that the broader Civil War framing was ultimately harmful to understanding what these movements were doing and the arguments that these movements were making. They're creating this notion of a national identity that is external to this activism, ignored the ways that these issues were impacting people's lives, right? Where activism is seen as creating a victim, being the nation or community, rather than understanding social change and unrest as a part of the democratic systems and efforts at trying to fashion and create change. So this argument, I think, helps us to understand how distortion through media representation, right, regardless of media's political or social bent or the arguments that they try to put forward, might ultimately lead to a not full understanding of what's actually happening on the ground. So I want to take some time to talk a little bit about the creative movement presentation and how that schedule is playing out, given that Ilari got back to me right before our class on Monday. We'll be talking a little bit about some of the legal strategies used to stifle social change. In particular, the Black reading is getting at the role of SLAPS and the idea of how legal challenges that might be frivolous and not actually done in good faith can be strategically deployed to hurt social movements and the efforts that people can use to respond to some of these concerns, right? So while some efforts to stifle or constrain a social movement can happen in terms of media and social factors, there are also ways that kind of circumventing or using loopholes in the legal system also function as a strategy to constrain social change too. Before we get into that, before class today, I sent a Canvas announcement that includes a link to access the Google form. You'll also find it on the front page of Canvas. And what I've done is given you a form that will help to finalize and lock in the creative movement presentation date and all of that good stuff. So just for some context, as a reminder, a note for people who were not here on Monday. So Oregon Rural Action is going to be presenting to us on Wednesday, December 7th. I'm in the process of just working out some of the logistical details like room and building. I am inviting people outside of the class. So if you know people who might be interested or other majors or even somebody who's not a major, but as a student who might be interested, you're welcome to invite them. They're going to be talking again about some of the strategies that are used in Eastern Oregon, such as a Spanish language initiative to raise awareness about COVID-19 and vaccination, as well as efforts to reduce inequities in clean water in Eastern Oregon. So I'm excited to see them share some of their work. So they'll be available face-to-face on the 7th. I'm also working on creating the ability for people to attend via Zoom who are available synchronously, but only remotely, and also request that they have the meeting recorded so that people can access that later too. So that'll be on the 7th, which has meant that the 5th will be the date that we have the creative movement presentations. And that'll work for us because first of all, the presentations are not super long. And second of all, there are a number of folks who have indicated to me that due to extracurricular travel, they will not be available on that date. So this is a way of just finalizing and locking in. So first of all, are you available and planning to come to class on Monday, December 5th? If you're not, are you able to attend synchronously and remotely, in which case you'd be able to present remotely? And if not, I'm giving you another option to do so on the 30th. So once we get that in for today, I'll be able to lock in a schedule for presentations to help you with preparing and knowing what to expect. Then after that, if you have any questions related to this presentation, you're welcome to propose them and let me know. So we'll check in about that in just a few minutes. I'll give you some time to briefly work through that form. Anybody who would like some more time on finishing this form? Great. So thanks for doing that again. Now that I have that, I should be able to resolve and get everybody's time scheduled. So stay tuned for an email about that. And I look forward to seeing what you come up with. I've been really excited with some of the ideas and elements that you've presented so far. Okay, so today's reading and discussion is about the Black reading called Slaps and Social Activism, the Wonderland versus Gray 2K case. So the case itself is interesting, sort of as a legal case that has some major ramifications for issues of animal rights and well-being. And while it's topically interesting, I think that the broader issue that we're looking at with this as a case study is to understand the legal and organizational strategies that can be used to stifle communication for social change, right? And there is a distinction between communication that is intentionally harmful or misleading or incorrect, and the impacts that it can have on our communication, right? The use of things such as propaganda. We've seen, of course, a lot of discussion about these issues, especially on the use of social media, such as Twitter, right? There's been a whole large debate over that content and the way that content is regulated. But what I think that we're especially interested in understanding is not necessarily an argument about whether or not communication in every context should be protected or legal in the context of the First Amendment, but more about how there are specific approaches that individuals might use to hurt a social movement and the goals that it's trying to achieve. And by being able to identify what's going on here, we can devise strategies to respond to it, whether through policy and legislative change, or by developing campaigns that are very specifically responsive to that issue. So I know I've been doing a lot of talking in the last couple of meetings, so I want to give you more of a chance to explore and report on some of the things related to this. You can use this through a combination of working through this reading as well as working through what you're noticing online when you search this topic or when you search what a SLAP is. So I'm going to give you some time in groups as your first part of attendance to take some time to look at, first of all, what is a SLAP? How does it work, right? We'll talk a little bit about that together after you've done some looking. Also, to understand what this case is, so what is Wonderland versus Gray 2K? What happened? And lastly, how were SLAPs used in this case? So in what ways did SLAPs impact this process? So let's do some larger groups for today. Let's do a team here on this side. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. We'll do 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 on this side. So take some time in groups, have one person who's writing or typing and being prepared to share. And since I know there's a good amount of ground to cover, we'll take a good amount of time, about 20 minutes or so. And about at 1:35, we'll come back and talk a little bit about what you found and what we can learn from this case in particular.
Allowing either party speech or communication to I mean, I really.
So it'll be about 10 more minutes here. In particular, you might want to understand some of the legal strategies or charges that a SLAP can give. So I encourage you to continue working through that if you haven't done so already. Austin, Texas. Is that where you traveled?
Yeah.
Okay. Why do you say that?
Because like I feel like you I love Austin.
Yeah. I've always wanted to visit Austin. I went to Houston a few years ago. But yeah.
Everyone's so friendly in Austin. Like it was weird because like when I did like
yeah.
Out there, he's like, how are you doing? I was like, this is weird.
And I've also heard that Portland stole the Keep City weird. That like it got its start in Austin too. So it just seems like an interesting place for sure.
And you like do find really like obscure things out there. Like,
yeah.
Like, little vintage stores and like they have like little pockets, just like a different things to do.
Nice. Yeah.
Or no, I was looking at UT.
Oh yeah. Oh, awesome. Yeah. Oh yeah. We really wanted to check out more of the South and Midwest because we haven't been to a lot of this. I did, yeah. It's the air quality was the biggest problem because you get the inversion and that air gets trapped there. But it's way more different culturally than you might expect. Yeah. Oh yes. Yeah. So some of my partner's extended family actually lives out in Manti. It's out there. So yeah. Like you turn onto an obscure road and then another and then another and another and then you're there.
These are so great.
Okay, so I think sounds like folks are mostly about done. Is there anybody who needs more time? Cool. So let's talk about this together. I think this is again, a useful example of some of the things we've been mentioning about strategies against social change. I normally use videos, but I did not use video for this because I feel like videos about like hurt greyhounds would be very sad and nobody needs that right before break. So let's talk a little bit about what a SLAP is and how it works. So let's start here on this side. What came up for you all about SLAP and what you noticed about it?
SLAP stands for Strategic Lawsuit Against Public Participation, and it's a civil claim filed against an individual or organization arising out of public speech. Also, SLAP suits are lawsuits that target activists, journalists, protesters, or other public figures to entangle them in endless legal proceedings that silence their voices.
All right. Anything that this side would like to add or?
Okay, well, what we have down is it's used to silence and harass critics by forcing them to spend money to defend these faceless suits. And basically intended to intimidate those who disagree with them by draining the target's financial resources. And we also said that it is legally strategic.
Yeah, so a few things. I pulled up my notes that I'd add here. Yeah, so just wanted to add a couple more notes here about kind of how SLAPs play out. So I think both groups were really hitting on some of the key ideas here. So strategic lawsuit against public participation, right? It is a term given to these types of lawsuits that generally fit under a category. And as people brought up, right, this is a civil claim. Oftentimes this happens as a class action lawsuit because a lot of corporations themselves are in like legally murky territory about their ability to technically file a lawsuit as a corporation on this way. But this idea, right, is that by targeting civilians and protesters and people in this legal process, what that means is they're not able to participate, get the word out, advertise, message on the cause or issue that they care about. We just wrapped up the midterms, and in the midterm elections, both in the state of Oregon as well as a whole number of states, there are a huge number of ballot initiatives that were on the docket. For example, state of Oregon had a really big one about high capacity magazines and gun ownership, but there was another one that was about essentially requiring people who walk out of legislative meetings in the Oregon State Legislature to be disbarred from being able to run for public office. So there were some in Oregon. There were also a number nationwide. For example, there were a number that were related to issues of legalization, decriminalization of marijuana, also psychedelic mushrooms, right, and other kind of things under that umbrella were on the docket. So there are a whole lot of initiatives, ballot measures, and so on that can be impacted by this process, right? As you could probably imagine, in a case like this one, when a piece of legislation through ballot or a ballot initiative is kind of on that sink or swim brink, a SLAP can play a really big role in shaping public participation. That is, SLAPs are especially useful as a tactic when there is a time limit or something on the line, like an election day, for that initiative. Because generally speaking, SLAPs are typically thrown out, but it takes time for it to reach that point. And up until then, well, somebody can't really act and use their advertising, media, or efforts of the campaign until it's resolved. So its purpose is meant to silence or harass. It's generally baseless, right? It doesn't really hold legal water or precedent. For example, it could be saying that defamation or untrue or hurtful information is being circulated, but then there's no real basis for that claim. However, the person that is putting forward the SLAP actually is responsible for providing some basis or evidence that this injustice occurred. Oftentimes, it's not really very substantiated, but oftentimes they do have to give something. And in particular, because the SLAPs are targeting regular people who oftentimes are being forced to pay a lot of fines or attorney fees in order to manage this, their solution is to not participate. If it's either spend a whole lot of money that I don't have, or no longer be able to advocate on this issue, well, they typically are really unable to do that. So intentionally false communication that's either published, so that would be considered libel, right? If you started to say that McDonald's was putting arsenic in the chicken nuggets, and that had no basis, right? And you were circulating that on social media, that would be libel. But if it's spoken, it's considered to be slander, right? Slanderous comments that are intentionally false to hurt someone's reputation. Again, a lot of why that is being discussed a lot on social media and Twitter. But other lawsuits that fit under the umbrella definition of a SLAP would include things like invasion of privacy, abuse of process, emotional stress, nuisance, injunction, and so on, right? So while these types of lawsuits exist and at times can be well substantiated and important, or people advocating for social change can use lawsuits as a part of their advocacy, Generally speaking, these kind of junk lawsuits fit under that umbrella definition of slap. Okay? In fact, the reading provides a statistic here about how the defendant ends up winning about 77% of the slaps that are filed against them, and a good portion more are just thrown out entirely. So they're not necessarily meant to win, but because the process of moving through the legal system is so slow, in cases like this one, the slap wasn't resolved until 5 months after election day. And so it's very difficult for them to effectively create the change that they claim to. So let's talk a little bit about this particular case. So Wonderland versus Gray 2K. What was this case? Let's hear from the side over here.
It said that it was a movement led by Greyhound Racing in the year 2000, which is Gray 2K, and was opposed by the Racetrack Corporation Wonderland Park. And in this movement, Gray 2K used TV advertising and debates as their communication method. Gray 2K fought successfully for the dismissal for the slap, but by the time court turned to dismiss the motion, the publicity of slap charges had already left a mark on the campaign.
Anything to add here on this side? That pretty much covered it. Yeah. So I think this does a good job of kind of talking about this issue. Another thing I would add is that according to Gray 2K, they estimated about 9,000 Greyhound deaths a year, which is very sad, makes me want to hug my dog. Actually know a couple friends who have rescued Greyhounds. We've talked a little bit about that issue as well. So, you know, for Gray 2K, this is seen as a really major issue. In fact, Gray 2K is still going, and they have shifted to a more nationwide model and focus that's trying to focus on initiatives to ban and stop Greyhound racing in a larger context. So, you know, interesting and important movement in the context of the issues, but also I think a useful case study in the challenges of this case, right? So by 2 percentage points, the ballot initiative to ban Greyhound racing in Massachusetts failed. It was 51-49. And the change in those votes and that 2%, as this group mentioned, is largely attributed to the slap that was put against Gray 2K. In particular, in terms of identifying incorrect information, using advertising in debates, and using evidence from Gray 2K's efforts to discredit them. So regardless of whether or not Gray 2K won, they were pretty wounded by the slap and the impact that it had on them. We touched on this already, but let's hear from this side about some of the ways that the slaps were used in this case. What were some of the things that were brought forward here?
You said Wonderland Park used slap to stifle Gray 2K's voice from a communicative and public relations.
So kind of the specific details about how they did this, right, was that they called the factual information about the Greyhounds. In particular, Gray 2K was circulating information about these deaths and about the impact on the Greyhounds, right? And the slaps in Wonderland Park was saying that this factual information was incorrect and constituted a smear. right? So they called the factual information incorrect and also considered it to be a smear and requested $10 million in damages, which you could probably imagine if that slap were to succeed, of course, would be incredibly damaging to the organization. The injunction and the restraining order is especially important, right? The restraining order restricted Grade 2K's ability to communicate about and actually advertise. Wonderland Park was arguing that there was a lack of concrete evidence into the practices and behaviors that they were using, right? So it was effectively saying that this is wrong, you don't have enough evidence, therefore this can be considered defamation. So that was the approach that Wonderland Park was taking here. So kind of putting this in context, SLAPs, as we've talked about, lawsuits against public participation, our strategy generally alters policy outcomes and are not necessarily based on a good faith grievance. That organizations who put out SLAPs are not trying to really call out an injustice or slander, but instead simply trying to deal with an issue that came up, or simply trying to use it as a tactic of stifling opposition voices on an issue, right? So I think there's a spectrum that runs from this through, for instance, the discussion of the use of defamation in lawsuits. For instance, the widely publicized one related to Alex Jones and Sandy Hook, right? That would be considered outside of the realm of a SLAP. The Wonderland versus Grade 2K case, right? Wonderland Amusement Park, as mentioned, was doing greyhound racing. I'm actually not sure if they're still doing greyhound racing or the legality of that in the state, but I would not be surprised if there were changes. And Grade 2K stood for Greyhound Racing Ends Year 2000. So that organization was really kind of putting out that major effort. What I think that we can take away from this are a lot of really key details, right? In this class, right, you're probably not going to remember or take away, or should really take away the nitty-gritty details of what a SLAP is and how it works. But I do think that the larger things that are useful for us to understand is a point that comes up from the author who talks about this idea of suppression, demanding not only an understanding of the opposing ideology, but a resolve and commitment to stop the spread of the ideology by hurting its goals, right? Ideology is what we consider to be a mental framework, a way of thinking about and situating the world. Again, it's like a pair of glasses, right? If you have this pair of sunglasses, a filter, you're looking at the world and examining the world in a different way. For example, an ideology of capitalism is sort of treating the role of industry and value on the basis of labor, right? It's very much often in favor of free market and so on, right? So that would be a particular ideology or approach. And suppression in this case is not just about hurting a movement, but hurting the movement's ability to spread and convey its ideas. So in this case, not only are you hurting Grade 2K, but you're hurting the ability of individuals to speak to and point out the impact on greyhounds that Wonderland Park had. Defamation, as mentioned, written and spoken, is said to injure one's reputation, but this is such a broad approach that it's probably not a good strategy in practical sense to achieve a change. So again, I'm not a legal expert or legal scholar. I'm sure a professor who comes in from that background could speak a lot more to some content and precedent related to defamation, but this idea here of legal strategies to constrain and limit the effectiveness of social movements, I think is a really important takeaway here. What I think that means for us when we're communicating for social change is to recognize that there are efforts to try to combat these strategies and tactics, but that when we see activism happening in the world, especially as it impacts organizations, we're walking a difficult line in terms of how we might be constrained in our ability to achieve the goals we want. So I'm going to take a quick poll. So we have a little bit more that I want us to discuss. Would folks prefer to get through the remaining things and get out a little early, or take a bit of a break first? How many folks want a break? Okay, so let's continue to work through some of these ideas. What I'd like us to do is to go back to groups and kind of put this in more of a modern context. So where else outside of this case have SLAPs been used? I'd like each group to find a specific example of a situation in which a SLAP was used, especially in regards to some type of social movement or activism. So take some time to look into that and hopefully find a candidate that works for you. What other legal strategies have been used to stifle social movements? So you might think about the use of lawsuits, but what else might be put forward there? And then what strategies are opposed to respond to the use of SLAPs? In particular, this article lays out how somebody might respond to and deal with something like a SLAP if it were to come out. So take some time to refer back to your groups. I'll give you another 15 to 20 minutes to work through and share some of the things that are coming up on this.
No, we're getting all we have it all next week or something. I'm good with whatever one you guys options.
Sorry. I could run certain myself. Oh, yeah. After slabs, there a bunch of students have like enacted after slab choose. So don't better than
About 5 more minutes or so. Okay, either group D4 time. Great. So let's talk a little bit about this. Starting here on this side, what was an example of a place where SLAP was used?
We came to pick out, again, some of us, but people represented headquarters in Germany, or the war groups, 20 lawsuits against NGOs, SOPA and REACT in France to stop them from human rights.
Okay. What was the name of the second group?
The BOLLOR, BOLLOR.
Okay. And you said that they were, what were they protesting?
Basically just to stop them from reporting human rights.
Yeah, so those are a couple good examples here, right? Of, in a lot of cases, protests or demonstrations or communication, right, that is meant to be peaceful, that is probably not really doing anything outside of legality, but it's kind of one of those, if there's no other avenue to try to shut this movement down, let's use SLAP. How about here on this side? What example were you able to come up with?
It was within the AFBAR's discrimination case, where AFBAR was basically accused of sexual harassment, and when, sorry, let me find it. So Ramin had written about a sexual harassment in Vogue magazine last year. However, she did not name him in the story, and after later just tagged him in it. And Akbar filed a defamation suit and accused her of willingly, deliberately, intentionally, and maliciously defaming him. Anyways, Akbar's suit and his army of 97 lawyers against one individual goes to prove that winning the case is not the journey here, but it is one way to drag women to court and intimidating them with law.
Yeah. So I think this is a good example here of the ways in which, like you mentioned, it's not necessarily about winning or losing, but about the social and reputational implications of that case, right? Anybody who followed the dumpster fire, and I absolutely did what I could to avoid it. The dumpster fire of the Johnny Depp Amber Heard case was another example where it seemed like the intent was not necessarily among a lot of lawyers or a lot of media attention was not necessarily about the truth claims, but about the reputation of the individuals in that case and about focusing on some of those elements, right? And, as you've mentioned, in a lot of cases like this one, individuals who might be coming forward to discuss and bring forward issues of sexual harassment are oftentimes put in positions of, through legal avenues and other systems, attempts to discredit their stories and experiences. And so some of those usage of the legal system as a chilling effect, have absolutely been seen over the last several years and definitely have raised a lot of issues here and have also raised a kind of chilling effect, right? It's not only that a slap is put out in a way that impacts somebody's ability to bring forward or advocate an issue, but also the way that a slap might deter somebody from even initiating a conversation or bringing something forward in the first place, because perhaps there is a threat or fear that if I come out and share this experience, that it's going to get a legal challenge, right? So that's, as you could probably imagine, a source of a really big problem for a lot of people who want to advocate for themselves or advocate on issues, of negotiating and understanding the ways that these kind of cases might play out in a legalistic sense. Again, not to say that people shouldn't speak out about things that are important for them to share, but that this is a reality that a lot of people have been having to engage with when they are sharing and describing those experiences. So thanks for bringing that example in as well. And again, I think thinking about these together, we can kind of see that there's this issue of trying to poke holes in or identify challenges with a campaign or social change initiative. In a lot of cases, individuals might feel like their organization or group is doing everything right. It's entirely peaceful, it's entirely focused on reform or change, it's accurate, and even in those cases, it can feel really frustrating if slap is brought forward. How about legal strategies outside of slaps that might be used? So I know you all will point that a little bit, but on this side, what were some things that came up?
Well, we discussed different types of surveillance, deception, mass media influences, which included story implantation and strong arming. And is that right? Well, okay, other legal strategies, it's just direct violence, but and legal system. I guess that's a thing. But yeah.
But they are really interconnected, right? A lot of these elements, for instance, of media representation and participation outside of that system, or the way in which media is framing a legal issue, can definitely play a really big role in public perception and understanding too. How about here on this side? Sure. I'd also add a court clog, right? Just the amount of time it takes to work through the legal system in a lot of contexts can play a really big role here in terms of limiting or stifling what a movement is able to achieve. We think to lawsuits as a major example, but we could also think about the usage of establishing or reestablishing precedent, right? Precedent is kind of a way of determining, right, based on how previous court cases are ruled will happen in the future. In a lot of cases, especially Supreme Court cases, right, there is an intentional effort to violate or go against existing law so that the Supreme Court will bring it up, right? That was a strategy that was used in the Dobbs decision that overturned Roe v. Wade, right? That a kind of state policy or law was put forward that was against existing precedent that required a reevaluation. So, the usage of those legal avenues can look really different depending on context. What about strategies to respond to the use of slaps? Let's hear from folks over here.
We said anti-slap statute, and then also there's you can dismiss the lawsuit if you, or out of early stage if you can vacate or do not, and then also some courts have recommended defense to these kind of lawsuits that target.
Right. So you might see a lot of variation depending upon the state and context, but there are a lot of initiatives that are specifically designed to reduce the prevalence of slaps here. But here on this side.
We pretty much said the same thing about the anti-slap motion, but we also wrote down that it needs to be filed within 60 days of the initial complaint or initial slap. And things to consider when doing an anti-slap is insurance, co-defendants, and press.
Right, so there's a lot of kind of initiatives that people have been taking to kind of preemptively address or even maybe prepare something like a legal or public relations team in order to manage some of these issues, right? So the legality and the legal protections of people in response to slaps look different across states and context. So I don't mean to say this in a very pessimistic or despair-oriented way. You're advocating for an issue that gets legally shut down, because there are strategies that have been able to respond to that. Just to say that I think that adds a wrinkle to understanding how a lot of these movements have been working. It's Wednesday before break, and since we don't meet on Friday, we don't get that day off. So comfortable having us get out a little early for today. To wrap up, we talked a little bit about the ways in which bad faith efforts, including legal efforts, can be used for social change, the need to be responsive to these types of challenges, and strategies that are able to help in dealing with that, and then the way that things like slaps are used as a strategic tool. So I will be posting your grades and also posting the schedule for the presentation this week. Have a great Thanksgiving break. And then when we come back, we'll be talking about emerging issues and topics. So I'll be a little bit more organic. I think it'll be kind of fun. So please pass forward or email your group's work. If you're traveling, safe travels. Have a great Thanksgiving break. Enjoy whatever you might be doing. I'm going to be flying back to Salt Lake City. So I will see you all again after Thanksgiving break. Have a good one.
We were wondering if we could do one, like sending out a video for our presentations, because